It's a great pleasure to welcome back the DJ in the know, Mark Devlin, and we're going to be discussing the issue, or the question, I should say, of why aren't we hearing more celebrities in the music industry speaking out about what is going on. So, Mark, thanks for taking the time today to join us, mate, and welcome to the show.
No worries, Nigel. Good to be back with you, making reasonable use of our imposed house arrest time. Might as well put it to good use, right?
Absolutely. So, Mark, as you keep saying on your channel to your viewers, you know, and there's a lot of my audience are familiar, we're in unprecedented times, you know, communist England and all that has arrived. There's never been a more important time for people to sort of get out there and speak if they have a platform. And yet in the music industry, or in fact, you could say across all celebs, sports celebs and film celebs as well, there's a sort of a deafening silence of non-comment. So obviously don't expect you to comment on the film and sports personalities, but generally speaking, you've written a couple of books now, Musical Truth, and I believe you're writing the third at the moment. So from your perspective, by way of introducing this subject, it's a big one. Do you think there are any, do we have cause to suspect that our pop idols and celebrities have been silenced in some way by their contracts?
Yeah, well, it's a curious thing, which I am researching right now for Musical Truth Volume 3. And I've been writing over the past month or so a chapter which I've titled All Assets Deployed. And I'm talking about how the music industry, just like all other aspects of organized society, has its chosen ones, its approved representatives. And many of them have been reinforcing the official narrative of COVID and just parroting the government and mainstream media line on things. And it's very disappointing, but to me, it's very predictable because a lot of these so-called artists have often displayed their propensity towards extracurricular activities, as I call them. And this is how you can tell the lifetime actors from those that are more authentic and might have got into the industry, you know, pretty much off the back of their own skill and talent. As I've detailed in my books, there are different ways that prominent musicians come into the industry. In some cases, it can be down to the family bloodlines that they're born into, which is the key to so many familiar public figures that we see. It's all down to their genes.
Yeah.
Then you have what I call the chosen ones, who are artists who show some skill and talent early on. And this gets spotted by those in the industry whose job it is to identify such people. And they get made an offer to step a few rungs up the ladder, and that offer is made very attractive to them. And probably they're not told exactly what it entails or what the price is that they're going to have to pay. But they discover this soon enough. And before they know it, they are owned assets of the industry and they're doing what they're told now. And there's no way out apart from the Prince, Michael Jackson, George Michael, Whitney Houston way out.
Yeah.
And then you've got those who are employed as a result maybe of military intelligence operations and social engineering think tanks, which have been behind certain prominent bands over the years. So there's different ways that people are pulled into the industry. And once they're owned, they pretty much do what they're told. And so when the COVID scamdemic broke and they needed public figures to help prop up the official narrative, you know, those at a certain position in the industry were called on to do their bit.
Yeah.
I was chatting to somebody at the weekend, and I'm not going to name names because this person wouldn't want to be identified, and I won't name the people that he called out, but he told me something very interesting, and I think this sheds some light on this dynamic as well. So this individual had worked in reality TV. He'd worked on some of these bloody awful, you know, garbage reality TV programs that we have. And he named 3 well-known reality TV celebs, or well-known for people that watch these things. I was familiar with 2 of the names. I hadn't heard of the third. And he said he knows these people personally. And he was having a conversation with them recently. And they each revealed that they've been paid £70,000 by the UK government to help promote the official line on COVID. And this included them stating that a family member had contracted the virus. So they hadn't.
Yeah.
They were just paid to lie and to state that somebody in their family had got COVID, and to basically virtue signal to their fans and say, this disease is no joke. Do what you're told by the government. Put on your masks, socially distance, don't have people round your house, don't go to the pub. Not that you can now anyway. So isn't that disgusting that somebody would take that sum of money for doing that? But if we've got reality TV stars being paid off to do that, and I've got no reason to assume this guy was lying, then the same thing could be happening with celebrities of all types. Maybe musicians are getting paid off as well. So those that aren't high enough up the pecking order to be expected to toe the official line are merely incentivized and bribed to do so in this way.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it does seem odd, doesn't it? Because you would expect that, you know, if 5% of the population at large is thinking critically and can identify and dare to step out of the mainstream story on the BBC, you'd think that there'd be some sort of representative percentage in the music industry. I'm sure, you know, and yet, you know, the idea that some of these big stars could command an audience of hundreds of thousands of people if they just showed a video of themselves making a cup of coffee in the morning, you know, you have to wonder how come. And I mean, do you think that ultimately there's pressure brought to bear, you know, overtly where it needs to be, or you know, subtly perhaps, you know, have maybe some of the celebrities that are longer in the tooth, should we say, you know, might be well used to the game. You know, we've seen people like Lady Gaga and Bruce Springsteen fawning at the feet of Joe Biden, you know, signaling stuff really. But yeah, what do you think is, I mean, are these people sort of gagged? I mean, do you think there's a certain amount of frustration there? I mean, is this reflective of the control of the industry?
I think for the most part, these people would realize that there's a line that they don't cross. It would just be an unspoken thing. They would know that with a scam as massive as COVID, world-changing, society-altering as it is, it's their job to toe the official line. They would know that there would be heavy consequences for stepping outside of that. And we've seen examples of it. So in the chapter that I've put together for the book, I've named a few honorary exceptions to the rule. So these are people that have courageously, conscientiously broken the mold, stepped forward and spoken their mind. And the most obvious name is Sir, which is a surprise, Van Morrison. And I believe this is sincere. I don't think his move is in any way contrived or, you know, controlled. I think that the statements he's been making, criticizing the UK government's stance on lockdowns and how destructive and counterproductive they are sincere feelings and sentiments that are coming from him. So he put out 3 songs last year criticizing lockdown, and he's been particularly vocal about the shutting down of the live music scene. He's apparently taking legal action right now through his solicitor against the Northern Ireland government regarding their policy on music venues and telling musicians basically that you can't make a living anymore. So I've got to respect him for that. And it's very surprising, as I say, coming from a Sir. I've mentioned in a few interviews before, and I've reiterated in the book, that Van Morrison turned up to 2 of my talks a few years back. So I was doing a presentation at the Glastonbury Symposium in, I think it was 2016 or 2017. And when I finished my talk, the organizer said to me, do you know who was in the audience? Van Morrison was there, you know, taking in your presentation. And then as soon as you'd finished, he just scuttled out the back door, you know. So I have to wonder what he made of that. But over the past few months, he's shown himself to be somebody that's capable of critical thought and not afraid to speak his mind. And he's had a lot of backlash for it, because every time he's posted one of these songs, or every time he's made a post on social media being critical of the government stance, the army of trolls comes out and he gets attacked and vilified, and people say he's helping to kill their granny and he's not being responsible and all this kind of thing. You know, very predictable responses. Half of these people are probably paid trolls. Others will be AI bots that are just putting this garbage out there. And other people would just be virtue signaling COVID zealots that have bought the official line, hook, line, and sinker. But I think Van Morrison is an honourable exception. Recently, he made a tune with Eric Clapton. So Eric Clapton joined him to make a record, again, very critical of what the government is doing. I'm not so convinced of Eric Clapton's sincerity, though. Just from things that I've researched about his history in the industry and some of the stuff that he's got up to, some of the things he's been into, I do have to wonder whether Eric Clapton may have been sent in to Van Morrison's inner circle to kind of keep an eye on him and, make sure he doesn't step too far out of line. That's just a personal suspicion.
Yeah.
So we got a few other names that are worthy of mention. The Gallagher brothers, who I've not had a great deal of respect for up to now out of Oasis.
Yeah.
But they've said a few things, Liam Gallagher's made some colourful Twitter posts where he's just said, lockdown's a load of bollocks and stay at home, fuck that, in his typical style, And Noel has been very critical of face masks. So he got into a bit of hot water a few months ago when he said that he doesn't wear a face mask on public transport because they're pointless, they're useless, they don't do anything. And he got a barrage of comments saying, you're being irresponsible, you're helping to spread the virus. Which is to be expected, And then Ian Brown, the former singer with the Stone Roses, who's had a solo career for many years. Ian Brown is a fully certified, awake and aware individual. And for about the last 20 years, he's been posting comments about truth and freedom issues. He's someone that definitely understands the dynamic that's going on. He understands that there's an elite ruling class that are hell-bent on subjugating and enslaving everyone. He understands that there's a genocidal population reduction agenda going on, and he's not been afraid to speak about that, and he's made songs about it. Little Tree, Little Seed, Big Tree was the one he put out a few weeks ago, which was quite well received. And he's been making records for years, just saying things that need to be said. So got to give up some respect for Ian Brown. Yeah. And again, he gets attacked. And bizarrely, ridiculously, he got attacked on Twitter a few months ago by Jedward, of all people. I mean, who the hell even remembers Jedward these days? For anyone that doesn't, or for anyone that doesn't watch reality TV, this is John and Edward Grimes, and they're a couple of Irish twins. And they won one of these bloody stupid reality talent shows, X Factor, I think it was, a few years ago. Collectively, they're known as Jedward. So they've got zero credibility. They're just a here today, gone tomorrow plastic pop act. Yeah. But they started savaging Ian Brown and going after him on Twitter. So again, I have to suspect that they were put up to that as a method of kind of reviving their career and getting them talked about again. Yeah. But it's a pretty sorry show, really, because those names I've just mentioned are pretty much the only prominent ones that I've been able to identify in the music industry that have gone against the official narrative. Everybody else has either been playing ball and putting out statements that support the official line, or they've just been completely silent and just kept their heads down. Very disappointing.
Yes, it is. I mean, I'm not sure I share your optimism with the honourability of anybody with a sir in front of their name. I mean, there's a thin possibility, because what comes to mind, Mark, is the possibility or the phenomena of controlled opposition. We know, or those people that are familiar with the global agenda that's being pursued at the moment will also be familiar with the idea that all sides are controlled, and this has classically been achieved with the environmental movement and others. Obviously, the most obvious example is the political charade that most people follow. So I'm suspicious that especially if there's a sir in there, let's push that aside and assume that for a moment he is honourable. But the question is controlled opposition. So I would almost suspect to see something saying, some voice of naysayers, if you like, that would be controlled by the establishment. That would make rational sense. If I were them, that's what I'd be kind of looking into, because if there's going to be some opposition, unless of course you can be that sure that there isn't going to be any opposition, maybe that's the case too. But yeah, so I'm just wary of the concept of controlled opposition of anything that is heard. But thank you for sharing those examples. I mean, that is encouraging. That you know, there's at least something happening there. You know, with that caveat.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you that the control system likes their dialectics. They like to control both sides of an argument, and whichever side of the argument people come down on suits them at the end of the day. It fulfills one or the other of their agendas. And yes, you would expect there to be some element of controlled opposition. So whether these artists are genuine and sincere or not, I don't know. But from what I've seen of what they've said, I'm inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I'm too beneficent like that.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm too kind like that.
Yeah, well, that's understandable. Well, what about then? Because there's a huge list of mysterious sort of well, suspicious deaths, should we call it, in the music industry. You know, all the way back to from Elvis Presley, John Lennon, Jim Morrison, through to Michael Jackson, Prince. You know, there's loads of them. I'm sure you could rattle off a list hundreds along. Do you think that any of those from the research you've done, are any of those examples? Have you seen sufficient evidence that those individual stars might have been at least trying to get a message out that was, should we say, contrary to what their publishers would want them to be saying? And have you seen any evidence that factor is present in the suspicious surroundings of various deaths of these artists?
Yeah, it's very murky waters when you get into this area, because I don't think there's a blanket statement you can make that covers all artists to say this artist was taken out because they spoke out. I think you have to look at each individual case. Certainly, I feel that some artists that we were told died didn't. And their deaths were in some way faked. I feel that way about Jim Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen enough evidence to feel that he didn't pass away in 1971, as we were told. And I feel the same thing about Elvis Presley, who is said to have passed away in 1977. Again, I've seen enough evidence to suggest that those deaths weren't genuine. But when it comes to the likes of Prince, Michael Jackson, and George Michael, certainly with those three, I feel what links them is the fact that they all spoke out against their respective record labels.
Yeah.
And they all had something to say about the true nature of the music industry and the stranglehold that record companies have over their artists, and the unfair deals that they give them, and the way they try to exploit them and screw them over and stuff. Many people will say that those three, or maybe Michael Jackson and Prince, if not George Michael, didn't die the way we're told they did, and their deaths were in some way faked. That's why I say it's murky waters. You could research this stuff for months and go off down all kinds of different rabbit holes. My personal feeling from looking at these artists is that they paid the ultimate price for daring to speak out about the industry, because they made some very controversial comments, and for many of their fans it would have been the first time they'd heard any artist say anything vaguely critical of the industry machine.
Yeah.
So that's the way I feel about them. There's some lesser known names as well that are nowhere near as famous as those three that I just mentioned. One would be Prodigy, who was a rapper out of a group called Mobb Deep.
Mm-hmm.
And he made lots of statements over the years about the Illuminati. He called them by name. He's referring to this power control system behind the New World Order master plan. And he put that in some of his records, and in some interviews he spoke out about it. In some blog articles that he wrote, he was talking about how the Illuminati controlled the music industry, and particularly the hip hop element of it. And he died in very suspicious circumstances in, I think it was 2017. It was around the time of the summer solstice, and often, you know, the dates become interesting that artists leave this realm, because the practitioners at the top of the industry are dark occultists at their core level, and they do adhere to ritualistic things like making things happen on certain dates. So Prodigy did suffer from sickle cell anemia, and many people are saying, you know, it just caught up with him in the end, and that's the reason that he died. But it does become suspicious when you look at the fact that he was speaking out about this stuff. And also he died on what was Sickle Cell Awareness Day, of all days it could have been. It's almost as if it's some morbid mockery going on there.
Yes.
Then you've got the dance music producer and DJ known as Avicii, who was Swedish. Tim Bergman was his real name. and he died in extremely suspicious circumstances a few years ago. He turned up dead in a residence owned by the royal family of Oman, I think it was, the state of Oman. What he was doing there, I really don't know. But he'd taken a bit of a break from the industry because the story was he'd got completely burnt out from overwork, from being completely exploited by his handlers. And he'd had alcohol problems, and he'd had, I think it was a kidney removed or part of his liver or something in an operation. He was in a really bad way, and he had to take a break from the industry. And then he turns up dead. And we're told that he took his own life by way of a broken wine bottle, which was found beside him. So there's various different ways of taking yourself out of this world if you choose you've had enough. Using a broken wine bottle isn't necessarily the most pleasant or the most efficient, I would suggest. So his family made the statement that he took his own life because he was so depressed and he was so disillusioned by the industry and stuff. But to me and many other people, that seems suspicious, particularly because in one of his records, I forget the name of it, but there was a track that he put out a short while before, and the video to it, the storyline depicts child sex trafficking. So at the start of the video, you've got a bunch of kids that are being abused. They get driven out into the middle of the wilderness in the back of a van. And then they open up the back of the van and there's all these rich and powerful pedophiles that are selecting these children that they want to take off and abuse. Then later in the video, you see a couple of these kids that have grown up to be adults and they're going after their abusers, and they catch them in various situations and they dispatch them in very violent ways. And there's a scene in the video where a couple of these kids are being chased by these pedophiles. They've got away from the gang and they get to a cliff and they realize they've got nowhere left to run. And they choose to jump over the cliff rather than be captured by these predatory pedophiles. So Avicii put out that video, and many people seem to think that him turning up dead was him paying the price for having tried to, in some way, sound the alarm about what goes on in the upper echelons of society. And then another one would be a little known rapper, apart from for those who follow the hip hop scene, known as Black the Ripper. And this guy turned up dead in April last year, April 2020, just after the scamdemic broke. So he was a conscious British rapper, and he made a lot of records that made, very potent statements and very meaningful lyrics. Made some records with Low Key, who's another conscious rapper, and Mike Righteous. So Black the Ripper was in Montserrat. He went to the Caribbean island of Montserrat in late February last year, and he was there on an extended holiday. So the scamdemic broke in March, all the lockdowns occurred, and he's out there in Montserrat. And he started making a load of videos for his social media, linking the COVID scamdemic with the rollout of 5G. And he was suggesting that many of the symptoms that are being attributed to COVID are actually people having adverse reactions to the radiation that's coming from the rollout of 5G. So it's obviously a controversial subject. There's been a lot of fact checking and allegations of fake news to kind of put down any sort of connection between these elements. But Black the Ripper was looking into all of this. And he also looked into the symbolism on the £20 note. You might be familiar with the idea that if you fold one of the new £20 notes into three, then the way the images converge, they show the symbol of the coronavirus that we've been shown on the news, this kind of spiky sort of thing that's supposed to represent the virus. And they also seemingly show a 5G tower. And the idea is it's placing the truth in plain sight, telling you what they're doing. Again, that old favored tenet. So then Black the Ripper turns up dead straight after he's put out these posts. And, he was a young guy, 30 something, I think. And I think it was put down to a heart attack or, some sudden illness.
Something unlikely.
But, to me, this seems extremely suspicious.
Yeah.
So I think there are many examples of artists who, in good conscience, feel that they have the influence and the sway to be able to get a message out to large numbers of people. But this doesn't go down too well with their owners and their handlers.
No. I remember somebody telling me, actually, I don't know this firsthand, I must confess, but Johnny Rotten was making noises about Jimmy Savile, I believe. And I don't know when this is. And if you know about it, perhaps you can clue us in on when it was. But clearly, I assume that was sort of way back. So I mean that's encouraging. I don't know if anything bad happened to him. Maybe just everybody just dismissed it as fanciful, at the time. Obviously, it's all come to pass that he was spot on and correct. Do you know anything about that particular issue?
Yeah. So that was 1978. Johnny Rotten was giving an interview, and he said to the interviewer at the time, "There are lots of people I'd like to kill," in his typical sort of droll humor. "There's lots of people I'd like to kill. I'd like to kill Jimmy Savile," he says. "I bet he's up to all kinds of sordid stuff that we're not supposed to talk about." So he says that,
Yes.
and that makes you wonder how much he knew and how much everybody else knew at the time.
Okay.
Because at the time that Savile got exposed for what he'd been in 2012, when that story broke, you had a lot of BBC presenters, Esther Ranson, Bill Oddie, who else was it? Noel Edmonds, I think, a few other people, Paul Gambaccini. They all came forward and they said, yeah, we all knew there was something about Savile. We all knew there was something creepy and sleazy about him, but you just didn't say anything. You knew to keep your mouth shut. It was like a best kept secret.
Yeah.
So it seems everybody was in the know. This was back in 78 that Johnny Rotten made those comments. But here's an interesting point. Would you not think that somebody like Johnny Rotten, who back in the day was thought of as edgy, dangerous, anti-establishment, fuck the system. He's Johnny Rotten. This is punk. It's the Sex Pistols, man. The Sex Pistols do what they want and they don't like authority and they hate the Tory government and all this. Where's Johnny Rotten speaking out about COVID?
Yeah.
Where's Paul Weller of the Jam? So, Paul Weller's seen as a bit of a political activist. He's someone that pays attention to what's going on. As far as I'm aware, he's made no public comments at all about it. Where's Morrissey of the Smiths? Morrissey's spoken out about royalty. He's, against the royal family and doesn't like the Queen, and he's vegetarian. He's spoken out about animal rights issues. Yeah, fair play. But where's his comments about COVID? Even Low Key, I mentioned earlier, there's a conscious rapper by the name of Low Key. He's of half Iraqi descent. So he's like half British, half Arabic. And he's had no problem speaking out about the Zionist state of Israel and their incursions into Palestine. He's been very, very vocal about that. He's made tracks about it. He had a record called Free Palestine. He got into trouble with the BBC in a freestyle that he did on a live music show on One Extra, where he talked about, Free Palestine. The BBC didn't like that. He's spoken out about Barack Obama, about his murderous genocidal incursions into various war zones. But he's had nothing to say about COVID being a scam. In fact, I've heard him give interviews where he's talking about the pandemic and the need to protect the NHS and stop the spread of the virus and all this. Now, someone who is capable of doing their own research to discover the true nature of the Zionist state of Israel and the way that they've completely genocided their neighbor of Palestine after stealing the land, is clearly capable of doing enough research on the internet to establish that COVID is a massive scam of monumental proportions. Anyone with an open mind and 15 minutes
faculty
and an internet connection would be able to discover for themselves that it's just lie upon lie upon lie. We're being deceived, we're being duped. Nothing about the official narrative stacks up. It's all bad science. It's all misinformation. So why is it that none of these artists are speaking out? Where's Roger Waters of Pink Floyd?
Absolutely.
He criticizes Israel. He's pro-Palestine. He's had no problem speaking out about these things. As far as I'm aware,
he spoke about Julian Assange, didn't he? He was helped. But so he's you'd think he's reasonably politically aware.
As far as I'm aware, he said nothing about COVID being a scam. They've just been silent.
It's interesting.
Where's Mick Jagger? Where's Keith Richards? The bad boys of rock, the Rolling Stones. Silent.
Sir Mick Jagger.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it to my mind, I mean, let's, we're assuming here, you and I and our audiences, I think, are on board with the fact that there's it's just a great big scam and that it's a political agenda that's being rolled out. And you do need a broader contextual knowledge to grasp that reality. But if we were the planners of any such narrative, any such unrolling of events, shall we say, mass vaccination, just communism basically unfolding across the Western world under a sort of a cloaked guise that people don't recognize because they think it's all going to go away next week or in the summer. You would think we were planning this, we would want to have popular culture under control, wouldn't we? I mean, how dangerous would it be to have a bunch of free thinking, free, youthful rebels out there bloody singing songs and protesting? I mean, you couldn't afford it, could you? And given that we know that we've had all these practice pandemics, when you go right back to AIDS in the 80s, for goodness sake, SARS and BSE and all of this, or now we're at SARS-CoV-2, it's not like it's just happened. And it seems to me as though they would have wanted complete control over the music industry. So to my mind, it's consistent with everything else I see, all the other areas of my knowledge, contextual knowledge. It's consistent that the music industry has gone silent. But maybe we can shift into the other, unless you want to comment back on that, Mark. I wanted to ask you about symbology, because we hear and see celebrities, with various symbols, and either it's that old classic devil's horn, or covering one eye, or goodness knows what the rest of the symbols are. I don't know. Oh, you're right, that one. So what's the significance of that? How does that sort of tie in? Do you see that as evidence of just a greater control, a sort of a diabolical control, you could say? And you've mentioned special dates and nasty sort of rituals, I don't know, rituals, devil worshippers. Do you think all of these symbols constitute evidence that there's something really quite nasty going on?
Yeah, well, I covered this in volume 1 of my Musical Truth books at some length. So you get these little calling cards that artists do, and you gave some examples there. And they're indicators to those in the know that these people are part of the club, that they're controlled. And they also have a subliminal effect on the general public that are watching these things. So it's not so much the hand signals and stuff, but it's a lot of the symbolism that you get in videos, in live stage shows, in record sleeves, in promotional photographs, this kind of thing. It's been going on since the beginning of the industry, and you see the same old signs and symbols. In Musical Truth Volume 2, I had a chapter where I decided to look at 1980s pop videos, because I'd entrained myself to recognize all the signs and symbols and icons and motifs pertaining to trauma-based mind control and Satanism and satanic ritual abuse and all this stuff in modern day videos. So they're right there in all the Lady Gaga videos, and Rihanna and Kanye West and Beyonce and Taylor Swift and Katy Perry, all the usual suspects. But I was shocked to go back and rewatch a load of 1980s pop videos, and I found exactly the same signs and symbols right there in plain sight. And it goes back even further than that. But you see a lot of Masonic symbolism. Often you get the black and white checkerboard floors that you get in Masonic lodges, indicating the duality of light and dark, and the nature of duality in creation, which is recognized by Freemasonry. You get Freemasonic pillars, you get the square and the compass, you get all kinds of symbolism pertaining to that. And they're right back there, decades ago.
Yeah.
So it's having a subliminal effect on the general public. And it's all part of this tenet of placing the truth in plain sight.
But do you think, so excuse me for interrupting, but do you see that as sort of, it's not exactly just fashion? Because, I remember when I was a kid at school writing out all the logos of my favorite bands and carving on the desks and stuff like that. It's not just about fashion and, I'm into this and into that, is it? It just seems a little bit too sinister, doesn't it? And a little bit too enduring, you could say, across the decades. So do you see, I think, my goodness, this really constitutes evidence of foul play going on here behind the scenes? Is that your outlook? I didn't mean to knock you off your thread.
Well, absolutely, because a lot of the signs and symbols used crop up in Satanism. You see them used in dark occult mystery schools, and much of it pertains to satanic ritual abuse, generational satanic ritual abuse. When you get into things like shattered mirrors and dolls and teddy bears with limbs missing and eyes missing, and pink hair and dyed blonde hair, these are all things that indicate the presence of trauma-based mind control, monarch programming, this kind of thing. And you find it decade after decade. As I say, there's an image of Syd Barrett from Pink Floyd where he's in front of a mirror and he's got a teddy bear with a limb missing next to him. And it's just obvious what it's communicating when you do the research. It's telling you that Syd Barrett was a product of mind control. And I've just looked into Peter Green. His real name was Peter Greenbaum of Fleetwood Mac. He was one of the founding members of Fleetwood Mac. And his story is almost identical to Syd Barrett's. So after a few years in Fleetwood Mac, he is said to have done a whole bunch of LSD, and it fried his brains and he went a bit crazy and he went very unpredictable and erratic, and he could no longer perform and function in the group. And the group had to basically kick him out, which is the same thing that Pink Floyd did with Syd Barrett. And the rest of Peter Green's life was pretty tragic. And it just seems to be a lot of parallels between those two groups. They've both been around for pretty much the same amount of time, and they've pushed various agendas. And you just find this thing going on time after time. So it has been going on forever. And it is part of the tenet of placing the truth in plain sight, because the sick, psychopathic controllers of these industries, who are the same sick, psychopathic controllers of all other aspects of organized society, because it all connects in together at the end of the day. They do feel that they have to observe this tenet of giving us an opportunity to know what they're up to. They always do it in coded, cryptic form, so that the average member of the public has no chance whatsoever of truly comprehending what's going on. It is possible to know if you do the due diligence and have the will to do the research, as I've done and many others have done. Then you can spot these things in an instant. But for most people, they have no idea what it is. So the controllers are not playing fair. They're not really giving us an opportunity to know what they're doing. But they feel if they communicate things in that coded, cryptic, symbolic way, they are letting us know what these people are a part of, and they announce many of their future plans in this way. When you get into what they put into cartoons and TV shows and music, movies and music videos, they feel that they have absolved themselves of the karmic consequence and the payback that would ordinarily come down on them by putting the emphasis on us. And they take our unspoken tacit approval as us saying we're okay with it. And if we're okay with having these things done to us, they, as they see it, have done no harm. I'm sure that's how they feel about the current COVID scamdemic, because there's no shortage of references to this in movies and TV shows and documents. You know, they've been very blatant about it. There's documents available in the public domain from years ago where they've been talking about doing this. There are patents for some of the COVID testing kits that go back to 2017, when we're not supposed to have known about the virus until 2019. So clearly it was known to be coming. And this is what they do all the time. They announce their future plans, and they've been doing it through the music industry, because they realize that when people are listening to a favorite band or just enjoying some music, watching a pop video, they're not expecting to be programmed and mind controlled. They're not expecting to be told what world events are coming round the corner. You're off your guard. You're just, chilling out and enjoying some leisure time. So music and entertainment generally is the ideal vehicle to use for propaganda, mind control, and subliminal programming.
Yeah. Do you think it's sort of no accident that the sort of pop culture seems to be increasingly steered by the sort of Britain's Got Talent and goodness knows what other shows that you got, this sort of X Factor factor? Do you think that sort of, the Simon Cowells and so forth are maneuvering things behind the scene? Is this where pop culture is going? Because to a lot of people, pop culture looks bankrupt. I know I'm an oldie, and I would say this anyway, but they don't make rock and roll like they used to. And I mean, how do you see that tying in with this potential control? Do you think that the sort of old days from the sort of 60s and 70s of A&R men sort of canvassing for talent here and there, is all that sort of the modern day equivalent? Is that just the show and the glitz of X Factor?
Well, actually, I'm very concerned that the controllers may feel that they're done with the music industry, that they've achieved everything they ever wanted to through it, just for the fact that they've so readily trashed it.
Yes.
There is no music industry anymore. I mean, there's no
Absolutely.
live music scene.
That's
Nobody's
another
been
point
playing
I
any.
want to raise with you. You know, the sort of seeming death of the music industry. Obviously,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
course, we can all buy online, but it's now
This is what
sort
I
of in
think
its
we've
coffin.
got. This is what I think we've got. Nobody's played any live gigs for a year. Nobody's been to a club. No DJ has played a set anywhere, with just a few exceptions, for the last year. And I never thought they would trash these vehicles because I thought they were too valuable
Yeah.
to them. And in the early days of the scamdemic, you know, when all this shit show broke last March, I was thinking to myself, they're not going to keep this going for too long because they need the music industry for the subliminal programming. They need the dance music clubbing scene for the subversive kind of regressive aspects of it because it controls young people, and you've got the drug culture, and you've got the programming through the electronic music. So it'll only be a matter of time before they bring it all back. But here we are a year later, and there's no sign of any of it coming back. So
I don't
I'm
think
getting
they do
very
need it
concerned
anymore, do they? I mean, it seems like a job done situation. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
I'm as gobsmacked as you are to see the willing, you know, complicit actions of the public as they dutifully don their masks in all shops and all this stuff. It seems to me that the desired compliance level, if there were a sort of an R number equivalent for how manipulatable the population is, I think they sort of hit the jackpot and probably deemed it ready to unravel this whole nonsense that you know we've been discussing for the last 11 months or so. So maybe that you're right, they don't need the music industry anymore. And what an absolute tragedy that's going to be. I mean, are we going to look forward to another summer of no gigs, no festivals?
Well, it's looking that way, isn't it? Because they've cancelled Glastonbury for the second year running. And, you know, a lot of other festivals that were due to take place through the summer have been cancelled again. And they're saying, we'll see you in 2022. Will we even see them back then? There are just two DJs that I've identified that have spoken out, and I give props and respect to them. One is Danny Rampling, who has been very critical of the effect that lockdowns have had on the economy and on culture and on people's mental health, because we need to socialize. We need leisure activities. We need some joy and some fun in our lives. This is a tenet of communism. This is how we know that we've got the slow march of Chinese style communism in this country and many other nations now, because all the joy has been removed out of life. You can't even go to church. You can't get together with people. You can't have fun the way you used to. And that's what communism is all about. It's very dark, it's very bleak, it's very cold, it's very soulless. So Rampling's been very critical of that, and fair play to him. And the other one is a guy that just came to my attention the other day, Steve Lawler, a progressive house DJ. He's been questioning the official statistics of COVID, and he said it's obvious they're being amplified and blown out of all proportion to justify keeping the scam going. So much respect to those two, but all other DJs, you know, Pete Tong and all these other people, have stayed completely silent. And I think it's because they've just felt they don't want to rock the boat, they don't want to be controversial, don't want to upset their fans. If they just keep their heads down and keep doing their tracks and their mixes at home, eventually the scene will open up again and the festivals and the clubs will restart. They must be starting to wonder what the hell is going on now, because they've kept their heads down for a year and there's no indication that the club scene is coming back anytime soon, or they're going to be able to go out on tour and start playing their gigs again. So I think these DJs, assets as they are, many of them are assets, you know, a lot of them are MBEs. Pete Tong's an MBE. So is Goldie, the drum and bass DJ. So is David Rodigan, the reggae DJ. So is Jazzy B. So is Norman J. They're all MBEs.
Sure.
So they probably considered themselves assets and highly respected and, you know, looked upon highly. But I don't think they've been clued in on this whole thing, because I'm sure they, like the rest of us, are very disillusioned at the fact that the scene has been completely trashed. And this is what I worry about, that we've got communism now to such an extent that joy and leisure and fun is no longer on the agenda. It's been deliberately trashed. And I think there's been a long period of softening up that's been done through social engineering to get the population ready for what was known to be coming, this scamdemic. As we said, it was planned for many years before. And if you look at some of the social engineering agendas that have gone on in recent years, they've been promoting the LGBTQ thing. They've been promoting transgenderism, transhumanism. You've got the whole woke mentality. social justice warriors, this progressive liberal kind of mindset,
Yeah.
or Biden Democrat voters in the States, the woke generation. And it's all the product of social engineering. All these ideas and these ways of seeing the world have been on somebody else's terms. That's how social engineering works. You have these ideas and these mindsets drip fed into your subconscious so that you think a certain way about something, but you don't realize that thought didn't actually come from you.
Yeah.
How many people that talk about gender fluidity and being non-binary, who would ever come up with those ideas by themselves
These are the
rather than having been influenced by culture? So I'm sure a long period of preparation went into this. And another aspect of it, which I've spoken about on a few previous videos, has been the systematic emasculation of men.
Yeah.
Because if they tried pulling this stunt in previous generations, let's say 30, 40 years ago, if they tried saying to populations of entire nations, you've got to stay at home, you've got to shut down that business that you've spent your entire life building up, you can no longer make a living, we're going to tell you who you can have in your house and when. We're going to tell you when you can go out and where you can go and where you can't. In previous generations, I like to think that by this point in the game, there would have been a militia of real men stepping into their sacred masculinity, that warrior spirit, coming together and saying, we're not having this. This is tyranny. This is going against our God-given rights and freedoms. And we are not going to accept this. So we are going to be the representatives of the rest of society, and we're going to put this down, whatever it takes to do it. They would rise up and they would step into that warrior spirit. Have we seen that?
Well,
No.
there are no such people around. There aren't, as you said, they've been conditioned, brainwashed, or uneducated, or dumbed down by 40 years of tragic education. They're just not there. The resistance is nowhere.
We've got this dynamic now of toxic masculinity, so-called. That's one of these sound bites, these social engineering sound bites. So that's been, the idea of being a real man and displaying masculine traits has been demonized. It's toxic masculinity. It's part of making the idea of real men stepping into their true power a bad thing, something that shouldn't happen.
Blatant propaganda. Yeah, it's shocking. I mean, it's just so alarming. I'm on a small holding here, and we have various sort of part-time workers come in and help, and occasionally at the end of the day, we move in close proximity to each other, and at the end of the day, we do sort of sit and have a cup of tea and a chinwag and sort of, and it's incredible to think. Somebody said the other day that this is potentially a legal activity. I mean, okay, we can justify it because we're running a business, blah, blah, blah. And if you can justify it, all the well. But the point is, ordinary people can't do this. You can't sit around and chat in a group anymore. I mean, not to mention the music gone and everything just off the agenda. It's really horrifying, isn't it? And I think the most alarming thing about it is, as I've said already, is that most people think it's going to go away. But we've already heard, haven't we, the official stories that the vaccination isn't going to mean that we can go back to normal after all because of some such nonsense that they've contrived. So it doesn't look very very good for summer 2021. The music scene, the life and enjoyment scene doesn't look very good, does it, Mark?
Yeah, well, it is communism, as I've said a few times. That's the agenda here. The World Economic Forum's Great Reset is all about that. One of their sort of mantras or their ideas is that you will own nothing and you'll be happy. Yeah. That's what they're trying to bring about. They're trying to restructure society so that everything is owned by the state. There's no individual ownership. They're all tenets of ideological communism. And I've got a quote here. I've included this in my book from a guy by the name of Yuri Bezmenov. And he was a former KGB agent who became a whistleblower. And he divulged many secrets of the Soviet infiltration into foreign cultures that was done during the Cold War years. So he did an interview back in 1972 after he defected to the United States. And he detailed a 42-point plan towards cultural subversion. So this is the methods that they employ now. They no longer undertake military operations. There's no bullets fired. There's no tanks rolling down the streets anymore. They do it covertly, and they do it subliminally, and it's a very sly, stealthy way of infiltrating culture and changing society through changing people's mindsets. So some of the points that Yuri Bezmenov revealed that were part of this plan included gaining control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures, controlling art critics and directors of art museums. And he says, our plan is to promote ugliness, repulsive, meaningless art, eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press, and breaking down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV, and presenting homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. And it goes beyond that as well into other methods of social engineering. It's very similar to what this other insider by the name of Dr. Richard Day had to say in a famous speech in 1969, which David Icke often talks about, and I've mentioned it in my books. Mm-hmm. He worked for Planned Parenthood, which is a eugenics operation. Bill Gates's father was one of the founding members of Planned Parenthood, and it was tied into the Rockefeller Foundation. And at a meeting in March 1969 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Richard Day addressed an audience of pediatricians, and he outlined all the changes to society that were coming in the decades that would follow. And he was bang on with everything that he said. He was talking about how they would change what you would see in movies and TV shows to desensitize people to violence and extreme sexual explicitness and all kinds of other things. He talked about how they were going to change music. Music would get worse, he said. It would be gradually debased and degenerated, and all other aspects of society would be changed as well. And he said this in 1969, and you can look at the world now in 2021, and he was bang on the money with all of it, because he knew, he had inside knowledge of what they were going to do. They planned these agendas years and decades in advance, and they achieve it now through cultural subversion.
Yeah. Yes, I'm familiar with the chap that you recount there. So just coming back to the music thing, do you think, I'd hate to think that this is a closed door and a done deal now, i.e. the music industry, but do you think the advent of technology into bedrooms, the fact that you can create film, video, music content, in your bedroom with a laptop, do you think that has in any way affected the industry to sort of free people up slightly, to reduce the influence of the record company? Has that had any positive effect, or do you think not?
Well, maybe this is where things are going to go. If there's going to be any semblance of an industry going forward, maybe it's going to be artists creating tracks at home and producers putting stuff together at home, because it's very easy to have a home studio now. I mean, you can make an entire record on a laptop now. The software is available. And that's what you're finding. You're getting producers that are putting together beats, and then they'll send the beat to a rapper in Los Angeles. The producer might be in London. He will send a beat to a rapper in LA, and then you'll have a singer in Australia, and then they'll send their contributions back, and the producer will put them all together and make a track and put it out online on social media and these online streaming platforms. And that's the way music's getting out there these days. You don't actually need record companies. You're not pressing physical copies of vinyl and putting out physical CDs. And anyone can do this stuff at home now. So there's no real requirement for A&Rs. There's no real requirement for talent and auditions and things like this. Maybe that's where the industry is going to go. It's going to be remote. It's going to be people not meeting each other, but just collaborating in that distant manner. Because this is another aspect of society that's been normalized through this scamdemic. The idea that you can do everything online now. You run your life off of Zoom or Skype. You do everything. Why go and see your mum when you can wave to her on Skype? Why cook Sunday lunch in the same room when you can be on a call with her and you can be, comparing recipes online? If you're having mental health problems, who wants to go and see your counselor face to face? You can just see him on a Zoom call and express yourself to him that way. So everything that we do, Everything that we do, we're being encouraged to do online and remotely. So
Yes.
it's withdrawing social contact. It's taken away that most natural of human functions, which is socializing with other people. We need this. It's part of our being, our makeup. And also the thing about everything being done online is it can be monitored and surveilled and recorded, of course, which is convenient for the controllers.
So using platforms, you know, like Spotify, SoundCloud, and all these other sort of modern tools that we have to enjoy music with, are they ultimately controlled as well in the same way that, you know, the record company used to be? Or is there, from your perspective, do you see evidence of there being some sort of liberation, if you like, of the artist? Because, you know, it's pretty obvious you can create a great song in your bedroom, stick it up on SoundCloud, and nobody will listen to it. And, you know, it might attract 100 views over a decade. But the point is, if it's languishing in a sort of bottom of a creaky drawer, metaphorically speaking, no one's going to hear it. It's not going to get out there. So you know, how does this interplay work? How does the home artist achieve popularity without somebody to say, here's the promotional vehicle, we'll promote you? Is it feasible for the home musician, do you think?
Well, all those platforms that you mentioned, Spotify and SoundCloud and everything similar, they'll be controlled without a doubt. So whereas you used to have to get a record deal with Sony or Warner Brothers or Universal, whoever it was, these are the Sony and Warner Brothers and Universal of the day. So now these platforms are controlled. You have gatekeepers who ensure that only approved artists get through. So if you're an up-and-coming, struggling rapper, singer, producer, you don't stand a chance of getting there under your own steam unless you're selected. And unless you're adhering to certain agendas. They choose you, you don't choose them.
Yeah.
So if you recall back in the days before Facebook, around about 15 years ago, there used to be a platform called MySpace, which went quickly defunct. When Facebook came along, it completely obliterated MySpace. But that used to be one of the original social media platforms, and it was highly used by artists, up-and-coming producers and DJs and rappers, singers. They would post up their tracks on MySpace, and they would get shared that way. And we were told back then that there were two acts that became household names. They became very, very famous merely off the back of posting their tracks on MySpace and getting recognized. One was Lily Allen and the other one was the Arctic Monkeys. So the story goes that both of these acts became famous purely, by random chance. They just happened to put their stuff on MySpace and enough people liked them and they shared their tracks and they got so many plays and they became famous off the back of it. Don't buy that for a minute. I mean, first of all, Lily Allen's dad is Keith Allen, the actor, who was already famous by that point. So bit of a coincidence that his daughter becomes a prominent singer, even though she's disappeared off the scene now. I don't know what she's doing, but not heard anything from her for several years. But then the Arctic Monkeys, we're told, anyone can do it. That was the mantra you were getting. Any band can be big and successful now in the internet era. Look, the Arctic Monkeys did it. They just slapped a couple of their demos up on MySpace and now they're on bloody Top of the Pops. Doesn't work like that. They would have been selected. They would have been chosen by the industry. You and your little band or your little, production that you're putting together in your bedroom will not get to those levels because you're not required by the industry. It doesn't work that way. So I think that's what's happening now with the online streaming platforms. Artists are being promoted to the very top of these and they're being given that prominence because they're the ones that are now, the chosen ones, the selected few.
And I suppose that the death of the gig, let's hope it's going to be resurrected before the end of my lifetime. The death of the gig, the fact that all musicians are at home or playing online with each other, which is just rubbish. It's really through playing live that the music thing happens, isn't it? You get 2 or 3 people, live music. Anyone who goes to a pub, oh look, there's live music. It's a real magical thing, and to think that that's really the way of connecting with people. People talk about, oh, I saw this really great band, or it used to be more like this anyway when I was younger. But gigging and actually getting out there, meeting people seeing the band, hearing the music live, being actually played rather than just all coordinated by a sequencer. This is really the thing that we're losing, isn't it, Mark? It seems to me that if we the idea that we'd just suddenly become a subversive if you or I launch a gig out in the woods somewhere and 10 or so people come and we all have a jam, now that's illegal. I mean, do you see the whole music industry being pushed underground? And do you see the sort of I say the death of the gig with sort of tongue in cheek, because I'm not optimistic about things changing anytime soon. But do you see this as a real serious consequence for the music industry? What do you see happening?
Well, it is. And again, it just confirms my suspicion that the controllers feel that they've got everything they can out of these vehicles and they don't need them anymore.
Yeah.
So it's an essential part of what we need as humans to go out and dance and listen to music. I made a reference in Musical Truth 2 when I was talking about the acid house and rave scene that blew up in the late 80s in the UK, how many people commented that that was awakening a kind of primal instinct within humans to want to express themselves to music, to dance and to respond to rhythms and to socialize together and all take part in what is basically a ritual, a ceremonial ritual. So going to clubs and going to festivals and dancing underneath the stars is a reawakening of that most essential part of the human spirit and the way it likes to express itself. So we're always going to veer towards that. There's always going to be part of the human spirit that wants to socialize and dance and listen to music. And if they try and crush that, it is going to come back in some way. People are going to rebel and they are going to want to reawaken that in society somehow. So I really don't know where they plan to take things. If this is a temporary blip and they've got ideas of where things are going to go on the other side of it, or if they're trying to crush it all together, because there is definitely what I refer to as the war on joy. That's been a big part of what's been done to us these past few months. We've been traumatized, we've been abused, we've been shocked. And part of that has involved removing all the things we used to enjoy doing. I have a lot of people saying to me, oh, well, lockdown hasn't made much difference to me because I never used to go out anyway. I was a bit of a hermit, so I don't even notice any difference. Well, it's not like that for everyone. There are many of us that used to like going to dance festivals, going to clubs, going to pubs, going to bars, going to restaurants, going to talks and gatherings and meet-up groups. It was an essential part of our lives, and we can't do any of that now.
No.
So, like I say, you're not going to be able to keep that down forever because people are going to need that back. And a lot of people, I think, are cooperating with all the tyranny now, wearing the mask and staying at home and shutting down their business because they think if we do that, like the government have told us, those nice people that care about us so much, Boris Johnson, lovely man. The only reason he got into politics is because he cares. He's got a big heart and he just wants to help us, So all we've got to do is do what he says because he wants to get everything back to normal. That's what he wants. And then society can return. That's why that's what a lot of people are thinking. We've just got to do what the government tells us and we can all get back to normal. They don't realize that the plan has never been to get back to normal.
No. Excellent. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time. Perhaps you could conclude by just giving us a little bit of information about your books, where people can find them, et cetera, your contact points, and tell us where people can go.
Sure, thanks. Well, I've got Musical Truth Volumes 1 and 2, which are available on Amazon. So you can look for me on Amazon and find those books there. Also, my novel that I put out just over a year ago is an allegorical novel called The Cause and the Cure. It's set in Oxford, my place of birth, in 1990. So it's full of period detail from those times. And on the surface of it, it's a murder mystery thriller, kind of in an Inspector Morse type vein. But I've loaded it with symbolism and allegory and spiritual truth. And if you're someone that likes to delve beneath the surface narrative layer, you'll find that there's all kinds of hidden stuff built into the story that you can have a field day with, trying to spot all the symbolism and all the hidden meanings and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed putting that together, and it draws on my memories of what life was like in 1990, very different to the way it is now. For a start, it was fun. And you had the acid house rave scene. You had a lot of these open air raves were happening in 1990. And I've referenced the political arena of the time. It was the last days of Thatcherism. You had the poll tax riots. I mean, there's a thing. Back in 1990, people felt so strongly about the injustice of the poll tax that they went out and rioted and caused a fuss, and they got the poll tax overturned. It became council tax in the end, but they had to trash the poll tax because it was so unpopular, because the people weren't having it. Where's that spirit now? That was 30 years ago. Now, barely a whimper is being made. Anyway, I digress. So those are my 3 books. They're available on Amazon. If anyone wants to get a copy from me personally, they can drop me an email to markdevlinuk@gmail.com, and I can post out signed copies. And I'm writing my next book now, Musical Truth Volume 3. It's going really well. I started it at the beginning of January. I've done a whole lot of it. I've got that chapter called All Assets Deployed, where I'm examining the reaction of various musicians and DJs to the scamdemic. Who's speaking out, who's staying silent, and who's towing the line. And I'm naming names.
Brilliant.
And I've also got a section in there. It's a new feature of my books. It's called Sound Bites, because I've got all this kind of eclectic, diverse information, these little tidbits of information, which are really interesting, but they don't kind of fit together. They don't flow. It's not as if I could put them in a chapter and it flows logically from one point to the other. So I thought I'll just present them as little snippets and tidbits, and I'll break up the main chapters with a bunch of these, just interesting little curious, sound bites. So that's what I've got in the new book. I'm aiming to get that out by the end of the year. Access to all my videos on my YouTube channel and everything else that I do is on my main website, which is djmarkdevlin.com. So you can find everything that I do on that site.
Wicked. Excellent. Well, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and to share your perspective on how the music industry, is controlled. There's a lot in there. Urge people to pick up a copy of your books. You obviously spent a long time looking into this, and it's great. Thank you for sharing the insights that you've gleaned so that people can get a better understanding of what's going on today, basically. So many thanks to you.
No worries. Thanks for getting me on the show again. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. And thank you all for listening. Do urge you to visit the website, lawfulrebel.com. There's stacks more on there. So check it out, and do join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.